Oh my goodness, we're not used to being like in the light queue, so that's cool. That actually kind of makes you feel important when the lights come up when you walk on stage. No? Let me put down some of this stuff. Thank you for being here. It's really beautiful and moving to see everyone in this room, and I can't blame you for coming to hear from some of the most brilliant artists in the American theater who are sitting right next to me. So thank you for doing that. I'm Jane Cox. I'm a co-host of this event, and I'm also the moderator for this panel because I'm also a lighting designer. And I want to introduce you to these beautiful people whose pictures you've been seeing as you came in, or as we came in. Itohan Edoloyi, Alan Edwards, Stacey Derosier, and Alejandro Fajardo, brilliant lighting designers who work in theater, dance, opera, music, escape rooms, immersive events, production design, theme parks, you name it, they've lit it. And I've asked them to start off because I don't know how much people are familiar with lighting design. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off, I'm going to ask each of them in order to answer the question of what do they love doing when they're lighting? Like what part of lighting are they really excited to do? What's fun about being a lighting designer, I guess is the question. And while each of them is answering, we're going to look at some of the pictures, some of the photographs of some of their work. So, wonderful, beautiful Ito. What do you love or what excites you about being a lighting designer?
Hello, everyone. For those who do not know me, my name is Itohan Edoloyi. I am a lighting designer based in Brooklyn, New York. I think I really enjoy the worlds that we can create as lighting designers. Somehow we have a very deep relationship with space, and we're constantly sort of trying to figure out how to carve space in different ways, where to focus attention, where the audience can sort of go, and I think I just enjoy the freedom that light holds in that sort of crafting of space and storytelling, and really just allowing the audience members to sort of go on their own journeys to get to those different areas of discovery within themselves, and also then to bring that back into the work. So that's what I love about lighting.
Beautiful, thank you. Alan.
I'm Alan Edwards, lighting designer, and two things. I like the hot seat, believe it or not. And I like deciding what is and what is not. Like where a framing has already been made of what we will see, and then almost reframing the framing inside the frame, if that makes any sense. And then being able to change it because we're in the hot seat. To be able to have one opinion and then see the other opinion and then decide which opinion we'll see tonight. I think those things are very exciting.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stacey, and I think my favorite part of lighting is probably cueing. One thing I'm really excited about, in addition to just kind of how you carve space throughout a piece and how you decide what is the most prominent versus not prominent, how the entire composition looks, and how the audience's eye will travel around the stage picture. In addition to that, just kind of how everything moves. So I just love creating spaces, or like love the act of kind of like, at which point do we move from this cue to this cue? In which way? Is it a jump cut, or is it a pan of the camera, to use film terms, you know? But it just, that's one of the things that I really, really love, and just kind of figuring out how to like subtly make something a little bit more perceptible or a little bit more present, or versus kind of like when you kind of release the tension that has been building in the space. And that's something that really excites me about what we do in these with these fixtures.
Yeah, I'm Alejandro. I my sort of artistic sensibility started before theater from photography, where in photography and in film, lighting is literally what you're looking at. So I really love the design, the compositional design side of where do we look and what's the balance of the stage and the color and things like that. But also I really value in terms of live performance, the fact that making a room where something is happening on stage and there's people witnessing it in the house is, I think, a really special thing. And I am really excited about lighting that is felt. And I think that's something that I've been trying to navigate, is like, what does that feel like? I think movement is a big part of that, whether cueing or what the lights are actually doing on the stage. But that's what's so exciting to me, because I think that that's when you can make a moment feel very transformational. I think light is a really powerful tool of how we see the world, and the qualities of light are very powerful. And when you're stepping, I was in a conversation yesterday with Natasha Katz and Deanna Howard, who did one of the installations upstairs, and Natasha was talking about how exciting channel check can be, because you're seeing all these lights out of context doing a different thing. And that resonated so much of the tool can be really simple, yet totally transform the space that you're in. And that's really exciting to me.
That's beautiful. It's so true. I've never met a person who didn't like to sit behind a light board and turn the lights on and off across age, across... So you're kind of entering a conversation today that's been ongoing for some of us, between some of us, and for some of us, we're new to talking about it to each other. But a little background to this conversation is that all of us were in an ideas lab in October, where we started talking about, what we would be interested in talking about, and going way back beyond that. There's a lot of conversations, and one of the things I'm going to dive into is the question of navigating this idea of lightness and darkness in the Western storytelling context, and the racism that is embedded in the English language and in a lot of traditions of Western art making, where the literal language has connotations that align whiteness or paleness with goodness, and darkness with the unknown or the bad or whatever. And this is, the English language that we're often dealing with when we're working in a theater together. And so one of the conversations we've been having ongoing is how does that impact your work as a lighting designer? And very quickly, we got to this question of what, if we're talking about contrast, light and dark, like what is neutral? So we thought we would just go there, just start there. So you're diving right into our conversation. And I don't know, who wants to pick up that thread first?
I guess I will pick up that thread.
You're awesome. Thanks, Ito.
All eyes on me. Well, I guess sometimes when I approach light and the absence there of light, I think about it in the way and somehow how I was taught to look at lighting design, which is to constantly question what it is that we are looking at and what we see, and to try to be very objective about it. This is I think the design is like a moonlight and there's clouds, and no. What is it that you see? Oh, it's a piece of paper on the table. That way, and then through that discovery, then you're sort of hacking at the more, nuances of whatever it is that you were looking at or working towards. And also, I think of it as light is something that helps us to see, and the absence of light is something that helps us to feel. So when I approach design, I feel like all of us, this is what we were on about just now, about the beauty of channel check. The beauty, a light turns on and you're oh, but we all start in the absence of light. We start in darkness. And we're just sitting there trying to figure out what is it that we feel to then paint and then bring up the lights. So yes, that's my thread.
So something that resonated in that for me, well, two things. One is and as it relates to these symbols, to like a visual language, the idea of sort of design as visual shortcuts came up in another panel earlier today. And one of the realizations that I had about my own design work is that I felt better about it, and it created more interesting worlds on stage when I took those ideas, those symbols that are given as like cultural constructs, and which, because I was trained in this way, is my first impulse. And some of this is like visibility, color vocabulary, these sort of rules of design that were so ingrained in the way that I was approaching my work. And what I started realizing is the best work that I was making was when that idea came up, and then when I revisited, I like got rid of half of it, and that is actually was leading to like more interesting kernels of design. The other thing that you just said that felt very valuable and is escaping my brain as I speak. Damn, I think I lost it. Yeah, it'll come back to me.
Do we? No, just completely ditto everything you both are saying, but I think it's hard because like again, yes, we were taught a certain thing of like, this is sort of how you represent XYZ on stage, but in reality what we're trying to do is create like an emotion or something, and I find myself similar to you, like falling it back into these things that are so kind of like rote and kind of like it put upon us to, that seems to be what everyone perceives as a standard of kind of like, this is how you represent this on stage. And so it's hard in thinking about dark and light. I don't know, I always come back to this conversation I was having with a director about a piece, and we were talking about those police lights that go outside of buildings, and how the purpose of that is to kind of really like expose everything there, and the quality of that light is so harsh. And I think about that a lot when I'm thinking about like, how do you create something that seems like a terrifying moment on stage? And I'm like, that's kind of terrifying, actually. Not like just a person sort of in the shadows, but like to be completely exposed, to not be able to get any rest because this massive buzzing light is outside your window. What about that as an idea of creating danger? So I always try to like think about, or I always have that in the back of my mind as I'm working with light and dark and thinking about like the perceptions of sort of good and versus evil. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's a little bit like spearfishing, but it's to find the strongest juxtaposition and let that be the thing that guides what the final decision is. And that does require some context for what are the rules, or what are not the rules, what are the things we're gonna do, or the things we should do, and the things we shouldn't do. But for a specific moment or thing, what just gives you the ugh, like, and so that can lead you to some form of white light. But the way you get there, it's like there's a meaning behind what is it and why, and or should it be in the dark, or should it be big, or should it be small, or should it be any one of these things, and then why shouldn't it be other things? I think for any number of plays that take place in a lot of white light, open space, that does help me decide what kind of space and color, and where is dark, where is contrast, where is any of that stuff. It at least gives me some meaning as to what I'm doing and why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
That's such a good point too, because it's and I work in some performing art spaces and some non-performing spaces, but this idea of like, what is the logic within the context of this world that we're building for this given show, this dance piece, whatever it is, and opening up to let that be as broad as we want. That it isn't like daylight is the warm white sun, or whatever, but being able to like invent a logic that we then follow through in the world building, because it feels more exciting to me. I think the thing that I remembered what I was going to say earlier that Ito started at was so often we start, not always, but so often we start in a blackout, which is such, I think that how a show starts is like so much at the heart of what the piece is about. Because we go into this void space of darkness, generally, not always, and what can emerge from there is so interesting. One of the projects that I work on a lot is the Fall for Dance, a dance festival at City Center that we do. Now it's 15 pieces over 2 weeks, 3 pieces a night, and it's the same stage. Some pieces have set, some pieces don't have set, but the process of the curtain comes in, the curtain goes out, and something is behind that curtain or emerging out of the blackout. I've seen so many different things come out of there, off that same City Center stage, forever, and it is such an open canvas moment that then we get to decide, is it big, is it small, like where does it go, in a way that I think is really inspiring and maybe hopeful.
I love that. You made me want to, because maybe people don't know, you made me want to ask you, like, what are the tropes? What are the tropes of theater making? This was not on our question list, I'm sorry. But like, what are the tropes of theater making, that in the context of this weekend's conversation, maybe you want to bring up, or you find annoying, or you find useful? We had started talking about naturalism a little bit. Like, Alan.
I mean, one that just comes to mind is, in quotes, more theatrical.
Ooh.
That's one. I don't know, and I don't. In what context? Another is performativeness, and I think that's I think is based on a point of view, and so like to get a comment that it's too performative or not enough. I'm just. Do you know what I mean? Does anyone know what I mean?
I know what he means.
I feel like I see it in so many places, and I'm like, is that what they meant? Like, did they know am I supposed to be watching this? That's two.
Yeah, that's good. Anybody else? Stacey.
What are the tropes?
What are the ones that, yeah.
Yeah, the one we were talking about just upstairs. Nighttime is blue, but let's be real. If I walk home at night, I see the neon from the deli. I see the amber of the subway light. It's something that we collectively have decided, or someone has decided that nighttime is blue. Therefore, when you're on stage, night should be blue, and it can get tough to push back against that if you're trying to figure out, okay, this is the space I've been given. We have a daytime scene. Now we have a nighttime scene. It must be different. Therefore, it is blue. So, I love to try to find ways against that. I mean, one of my favorite lights in the world is sodium vapor, but like, you know, it's hard. Yeah, that's one of the tropes.
I am constantly battling my ingrained expectations of visibility in general. And I think the trope version of that is that comedy is bright and drama is contrasty. And the reality is that I just like sculptural and dramatic lighting. But it is a balance of I think how I frame that question for myself then is like that visibility is still a tool. So when is that the tool that I need? And more often than not, it's not the funny moments. It's actually like the most deeply human moments. It's like when you really want to see, just see someone, you know, and just be able to actually turn the lights on and be in the presence of that person or performer. And because I like to build these like hyper aesthetic worlds, it becomes actually the moment where the aesthetics are not my priority and the person is my priority, which, like, again, we're taught that the person is the priority, but part of my job is to look at the whole composition and make something that is exciting. At least what I like about my job is to make something that is exciting on a living stage. But visibility is something that I'm constantly struggling with, because I'm like, when I first started designing and I was doing all these like little downtown basement shows and there's like 15 lights, you know, in my brain where I was taught like front light, backlight, all these systems, all of a sudden half the inventory is gone and I'm just front lighting the stage. And the work was not as good until I started like letting go of that need a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting in like breaking away from the structures in which we were taught to then get to the juice of like what we're interested in as artists, as people that like observe work and create work. And I also go through those struggles constantly internally of like, is this bright enough? Is this not bright enough? But then also like, what is helping push the narrative along sort of cuts out that like voice that's like, oh, well, they want it to be bright. And actually rather, there's something beautiful in like them being half lit, because then it allows the person watching to then think about the psyche of the person that we're seeing on stage that's half lit and then go delve into that in some ways, which I find really exciting, as opposed to it being like, you know, and also to say there are moments where it's great to have the light, the front light, but to just see, but like what is really seeing and what is it that you're trying to like uncover? Yeah, and it's interesting. In some ways, I feel like lighting designers, but I don't know, through this whole conversation throughout the weekend, I feel like maybe most designers are people reincarnated from the Romanticism era, because honestly, I was really thinking about it. It was like, because I feel like we're constantly, you know, sitting there reflecting and like not looking at subject, but looking at what you just said, the entirety of things, the beauty of things, the like grotesqueness of things, and how that sort of can connect to the work in which we're trying to portray, and also like what we imagine for, I don't know, future designs or future ourselves. So it's very interesting.
I mean, I think, well, there's something interesting in what you all are saying. Like, I find that there are the same, I like to think that we've got like 8 tricks in our bag, and we permutate them in different ways, and there's like different reasons that we do different things, and sometimes they're design reasons, which is like some sort of something, and then there's a technical reason, and we may do the same thing in different contexts for different reasons. I mean, that theatricality thing, it's like the follow spot, you know, in a super tiny space where, you know, the first row is 6 feet away, the follow spot is one thing, and then in a 3,000 seat house, where, you know, half the house is more than 60 or 70 feet away, the follow spot is it's a different meaning for the people in front than it is for the people in the back. And so, you know, what it means or can mean or why do it I find that I constantly have to ask that question. Like, I didn't think we needed a follow spot when I read the script, but I guess we need 3. I mean, sorry.
Yeah, but I mean, this visibility thing, you know, one of the most exciting things that I'd ever seen was a scene that was just done in candlelight with a candelabra. And I was somewhat far away, but like I could feel like everybody in the house just lean in to like get access to that moment because it was so intimate and it was, you know, there was movement on the actors' faces, and they were in shadow. They moved into and out of it. Everything else on the stage had just disappeared. And like when I think about like visibility, it's just like, what are other ways of visibility? Like, how else can we cut through the noise and just kind of be like, all right, great, let's get to this essentialness of what this. That's not a word, but yeah.
But also through that, But also through that, I feel like it's tied into culture and also like how certain cultures choose to showcase work and present, which is then thinking about the visibility aspect versus like the Western culture is like we're following these ideals of how they've done it in the past, and we're in 2023.
Yeah.
And also just like the idea of the internet and what we are exposed to, another idea of visibility and seeing, and like, yeah, totally. I'm super excited about dim lit spaces and also the intimacy of spaces because of how much light is present versus not. And I feel like that's not something that I think maybe now there's more opening to it in Western culture from what I'm seeing, but it's still something that's like we're cracking at the surface, but we're not there yet. And it's not something that's integrated into like the bigger spaces.
It feels really weird after spending, 2 years sitting in front of a laptop with a ring light shining on you. It just feels, I don't know, I feel like everyone is reacting in a different way after doing all that.
Something that you said that I think reminds me of the, what am I trying to say? Not just the tropes as in like what are design tropes, but the tropes as in what are the expectations of how the light participates in different styles of performance, which is, I think there's a big variety there, and I think there's expectations, not rules. And again, I think it's like an interesting thing to disrupt, but there's something about like what is this style calling for, but then how can we change the experience of it, and how can we? I totally think that's those. Let me frame a better sentence. I definitely think that those sort of ideas of how different styles of performance should look are antiquated ideas, yet they're still what we are being taught about how lighting works, or how to participate in lighting in performing spaces. And I think there's actually something really exciting to what Ito said about these sort of like romantic painters, where it was like they were figuring out tools to represent the world that they were experiencing, both visually and physically. And I think because we're now taught in a very rigorous way how to participate in this industry, we're maybe in a point where we need to have some conversations about like how do we break those own expectations? Like what is our impressionistic way of lighting a naturalistic show? For me, it actually naturalism, which we've been having a lot of conversations about, like the value that it has. I'll say specifically in New York or American theater, was part of the reason that I was like, I want to light dance and I want to light music festivals and I want to light other things, but I do think that the openness of like how can we dream a different aesthetic about how these worlds are built feels really valuable. And I think the example of the artist, of like impressionists, is like, oh, they figured out a new way of painting light. And then that created a whole new inspiration for all of, I mean, for me, I will say specifically, of how you visualize space and outdoor space and things like that.
And I think it just, you know, one of the things we've been talking about is the question of like, what is culturally specific about the way we light, about the way we're taught to light, and that goes to questions of like how you direct attention visually, which is different across cultures, but Western movie making has a pretty dominant in the global market, so that's out there, and that has a kind of Western way of using light to pay attention. So I'm always excited to see something that doesn't. And you know, Brandon Jacob Jenkins, who's sitting over there, and I taught a class on this question of writing and lighting and race, and we were so inspired by specifically African American fine artists working on the question of what does it mean to see a face. And for me, it was so relieving to encounter that work more deeply, because I felt I've often sat in the theater as a lighting designer and being told, oh no, like that's not how we should see the face. You know, that there's expectations that we haven't acknowledged are culturally specific about what it means to see a face or to see a figure against a ground. Or a very simple example is typically one has been, I don't know what happens now, but when I was taught, you know, to deal with color, I was taught it by, you know, lighting a white styrofoam globe in a dark space. It didn't take me long when I was teaching myself to realize that was sort of an inherently racist act, to be lighting people to think of color as something that happens on a pale object in a dark space. It's sort of obvious. But that does make me want to, well, I have two questions. You pick. I have two things I wanted to ask you. One thing I wanted to ask you before, which was the question of the use of color and whether that changes for you. Like, do you have a color vocabulary that's yours? Does it change based on the context? Like, talk a little bit about color. So that's one question. And the other one's connected, I guess, which is like, what's the point of view you bring? Do you feel that you have a point of view that you bring? I mean, as a lighting designer, you know, you're being asked to have a point of view on a particular piece, and I think we pride ourselves on our malleability and flexibility in different contexts. But would you say that you have like also an overarching point of view as a lighting designer? So I don't know, take your pick.
I love both of those questions. I prefer color. And for me, color, I'm going to sort of tie both questions together, in that I think of color in various ways, but I mostly think of it as a tool. So there's normally like an atmospheric or emotional connection to any given, you know, again, thinking compositionally, like, is it the background? Is it the foreground? Is like the figure in color, or is the figure in lightness around color? But I really think about it as a tool, and I learned a lot of really valuable color lessons from Clifton Taylor, and most importantly is like the idea of dominant and recessive colors. And not, again, that's like sort of intellectually aggressive language, but thinking of like, when you look at two colors in relation to each other, they have a natural dynamic. One is going to draw your eye away more than the other. And how can I use that as a tool on stage? And I think in terms of the point of view, it's like more often than not less my point of view. And I mean, I do a lot of things in like pre-existing, you know, there's a plot that is established by someone, or I'm like within a rep plot or something like that. Or I gave myself a ton of tools because I like to have a lot of tools available. And I really believe that one of the best skills that one can have as a lighting designer is being able to make a whole variety of things out of one set of tools. So I think that's like really where I'm like starting from, is like any given scene might have like, this is dramatic and questioning, so I want it to be like sculptural and shadowy. But then if it doesn't work, within a few minutes I want to have like a completely different option of things that I can show in that space. So I really think one of the greatest skills of lighting designers is just adaptability and calmness, because our work happens in the extremely stressful moments. And there's a lot of tools now to sort of work around that. And maybe it's like that those tools did not exist when I was learning, but it is harder for me to learn that tool than it is for me to like be on my feet and like be able to make a couple of different things and respond in different ways.
I mean, what was the first question about color?
Yeah, like does your use of color, talk about how your use of color does or doesn't change with context?
I mean, I start by trying to find if you thought of color as a sphere and there was an equator, like where is the thing that reveals the 3D form? We haven't talked about how we do it, just what color is it? And then what can or should the other stuff be? And that, should they be the same? Should they be different, and how? And sometimes it leads to the kind of what you were saying, the background and foreground. What should be more saturate? What shouldn't be more saturate? What is there a reason that, you know, if the foreground or the figure or whatnot is the more saturate, you know, there's a point of, I think that's where the point of view comes from. What should we be looking at? And so I don't know. I mean, I guess we have 256 million colors with LEDs. Yes. But so even more so, how do you choose? I mean, that's insane. Which goes back to the question about blue as night. Which blue? Yeah. Right, exactly. You know, it used to be that there were a handful of them, and there were some that didn't burn as fast as the others. So that was it.
Yeah, I mean, color is so interesting because, again, now with LED, we have so many different options, but also kind of how do you approach into a project with a set idea of what you're going to use or anything like that. I feel like I don't find myself kind of going back to the same colors. I kind of have to take in the entire picture of what everything's going to be in a space beforehand, like what color is the wall, what color are the costumes, what's the skin tone of the actors, what are their undertones, because everyone's got different undertones, and then you throw makeup on top of that, and God bless you. But it feels like, you always have to be very flexible with that, and I feel like, I started off painting, and I remember my first semester of painting class, we were only allowed to use black and white paint, and then every, I think 2 weeks, we introduced either cadmium yellow, cadmium red, or ultramarine blue. And you had to spend this time doing these still life paintings, only mixing black and white and just putting color against color to create the image. And just to create all the different shades. And so that sort of idea of kind of I can actually get a lot out of black and white, and then, throw a little yellow in there, I maybe can get some green out of that, And so it's really, I feel like that's what I try to do on stage, and I feel like I come into every piece with kind of okay, that's a brown wall against a green wall. What color can I throw against that? That will do. What array of colors can I throw against that? That will give me the most variety, and what does it look like down on dimmer? Right. Yeah, and I think that's, I don't know if I have a point of view. I feel like I do, but that's sort of kind of my color point of view.
Yeah, beautiful, thank you. Ito, you have to take this one, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Oh my, no pressure. I will say, color very much excites me. I feel like people who know me know that I'm always in a lot of colors, and I try very hard to not wear black. Unless I have to. I know, I'm sorry. Like, not even black shoes today. Let's talk about it. Color is super exciting to. Sorry, hang on. I feel like I don't know. In 2021, the colors I used that I remember using a lot were like varying greens, varying purples, varying blues, and I used those religiously because they look good. Green, a certain type of green looks great on dark skin. And that I learned during the pandemic, just like playing around with like my LED bulb, because what else was I doing? So I was just like, it's like just throwing some gel, and I'm like, wow, this green looks so good on my skin. And I was just like, oh wow, you know? So then I used it, and I was like, oh great, that looks good on their skin as well. And so there was like that sort of like color joy moment that I had. And then I was given a set to design once in New Orleans that was all white. And I was like, good heavens. And that was a whole thing. Just like processing it. And then I thought, okay, well, white has many shades as well. And it's not just like white. It's like blue white, red white, purple white, green white. So there was something valuable in looking at all the different shades of white light to then get to the color. And I guess like as I've gotten older and somehow more refined in this craft, that I'm curious about the color story that's going on. And the reasons why. I think one of you may have mentioned it before, but the impetus to why you were choosing this color, and then what journey that color then takes you on to the other color and the other, however, or then the absence of color. So I don't know if I don't know if that means a point of view. I don't think I've cracked the code. I'm still sort of figuring that out, but. I don't know, I'm very excited by color. I'm very excited about using it, even like the darkest of greens in spaces that people, like, why do we hate on green?
Right?
That is the thing!
Green is lovely.
We hate on green so hard. Yes.
I mean, there's something interesting that you just said about, I can't remember what but it made me think that, white, that's what it was. That which white and, a tungsten, I think I'm looking at tungsten. The reason I think that is it's somewhat of a default is because it has the widest color spectrum, that it allows the thing to be revealed as much of itself as it can be. But now we have other tools that don't do that thing so well, that do other things well. And so now the idea that there is a thing that the revelation of other colored things is simply a tool. Mm-hmm. And that maybe there are things that do other things better that don't do that thing so well.
Beautiful. I'm gonna. This we could go on during this conversation all day, but I want to include the audience and make sure we do. Sorry, Alejandro. Make sure we give folks a chance to ask questions. So, oh my goodness, there's a lot of hands. I'll start in the front row over here.
Great, thank you. So thanks for this conversation first. I'm curious, because I think a lot of us have, over the past couple of years, gone into what is the filming and streaming of theater. And some of us are continuing in that space, and some people there are conversations about whether or not that is theater or not, right? I'm curious as to how that affects your design from, I guess, a feeling space and a technical space. And especially when we think about the different ways that that our eyes and the lens are gonna capture color and light in different ways, and whether or not that allows for a different perspective, especially when we start thinking about the full range and palette of skin colors that are available, and how that is captured in film versus how our eyes might see that in a theater space.
Beautiful question. And I'm just going to ask, because there's so many questions, and we probably only get to a couple of them, but let's have one or two people respond so we get a couple more questions, rather than feeling like we all have to.
it is different needs of lighting, right? The camera's not an eye. It does a good job, but it does not have the to throw in my point that I was going to say earlier, like seeing is so subjective. Like how we all see color is so subjective. But specifically with like how to deal with like things on stage and things in camera, I find myself thinking about that even in situations where it's not going to be streamed or captured, selfishly, because inevitably someone's going to photograph it, and that is part of the vocabulary too, is like what are the tricks that I know about how things tend to look green to me that I want to add pink on, skin tones. I also think we are in this really difficult time that we are asked to be lighting designers for multiple medias at the same time. And inevitably, you're going to have to make a decision. And because the eye has more flexibility than the camera, I tend to see, make sure it looks good on camera first. But it is a really difficult part of what we're doing right now in this new space.
Thank you. In the front row here, sorry, front rowism. Sorry. It's easier to see with the lighting.
Thank you. I was very intrigued by the comment that Adam Rigg made to the New York Times. Is he here? He was interviewed for the New York Times, set designer for Ain't No Mo, and it's about breaking norms, to your point. And he, oh gosh, I just lost it. He described that the production was designed primarily by people of color, indigenous people, and it was edgy. And when it moved to Broadway, the design creative team changed. There were some people of color, but they brought in the heavy hitters for Broadway, I guess, and it lost its edginess. And I wondered if any of you have had that experience or can speak to that, because it has to do with the business of lighting.
Ruh-roh.
I just want to say there are lots of heavy hitters of color designers on Broadway. So just to put that out there, in the article he said cis white male designers. But anyway, does anyone want to take that on, or should we slide right on? That's a big question. I feel.
Yeah, you go.
Are you willing to take that one on, Stacey?
I mean, maybe I'm too close to that subject right now.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, it's unfortunate. It is unfortunate because, and I'm going to speak from the eye, that over the last 3 years we have uncovered a series of, quite a few people who are, I'm going to step out off the cliff and say ready, we can put that in quotes, but what does it take? That's the question I have to ask. What does it take?
I think it's also in this particular conversation, it's important to name that specific, we work in an industry, when we're talking about Broadway, a large financial industry. Oh. Wow. I'm going to keep on talking and say that it is a capitalist industry that is risk averse. So obviously it is going to make decisions that are risk averse.
This was that movement I was talking about earlier.
Whoa. I would love to move on to your beautiful question because you have the most beautiful jacket on. You didn't have your hand up? Oh, shoot. Okay.
Hi. Scenic designer here. What's the number one thing that a scenic designer does, or that a scenic designer can do that it can inhibit you from doing your job well?
I love that question so much.
Ceilings. And I rest my case.
I will also just say beige rooms with warm undertones when everyone on stage is beige.
I mean, you said two.
No, go for it. No.
I mean, the people, many people who have mentored me have said that the scenic designer is the lighting designer, and so that is a giant consideration when crafting a space. Where does the light come from, or where doesn't it? Where can't it? That's a huge consideration. And we have techniques. There are ways to deal with ceilings and whatnot and other things, but you're crafting the way that we may or may not be able to achieve something.
And with that, I'm afraid we have to wrap up. I know, but I just want to thank, before I thank these brilliant genius humans, I also just want to thank you all for being here. It's been an extraordinary weekend of discovery and learning for me, so I'm so grateful for everyone who participated and talked to us and looked at the beautiful work by the young designers. And then I just want to thank these brilliant, wonderful humans.